I guess if I'm going to talk about the top 10 hidden gems in my board game collection, I'm going to have to explain how I determined if something was overrated. So essentially what I did was first looked at the board games on my shelf and identified the games that I felt haven't really been talked about a lot on BoardGameGeek.com, where I spent a lot of time over the past 15, 20 years, I guess. And in doing so, I came up with a full 24 games, which shows that a sizable percentage of the games that I have on my shelf I feel are sort of hidden gems or underrated or overlooked. And I guess it points to the fact that my own personal tastes don't necessarily align with the average board game geek hobby gamer, despite the fact that Gloomhaven is my #1 game. I will say that I align perfectly in that regard. But from those 24 games, then I had to narrow it down to 10. So next I went on to Board Game Geek and I looked at the number of owners of each game. And I essentially ranked my top 10 games based on which of those 24 games had the fewest owners. And these games are ranked from the most owners to the fewest owners. And where there was a tie in that number, I next looked at the number of ratings that had been given on BGG for each game. So a game with fewer ratings shows fewer interaction from members of Board Game Geek, and thus would show that they are more of a hidden gem. So with that explanation being explained, let us dive into the top 10. Okay, so again, we have these ranked in order of most owners on BGG to the fewest number of owners. And starting at number 10 with 2,000 owners, we have Shadows in Kyoto. This is a wonderful little game that has its roots in the old game Stratego, where you can see your own pieces and your opponent can see their pieces, but you can't see your opponent's pieces. And in that sense, it's also similar to Lord of the Rings: The Confrontation. In fact, it's more similar to that game than Stratego in that it's sort of taken Stratego, really streamlined it, add some really interesting elements to it, some card play and that sort of thing, and made for a very fun game. It's strictly for 2 players, it plays quickly, and I sure wish I had a player to explore this game with me because it is a very interesting one. But that's number 10, Shadows in Kyoto. At number 9 here, we have a game that showed up recently in my favorite racing games video. This game on BGG shows 1,800 owners, and it is Fast Flowing Forest Fellers. This in fact was number 4 on my top 10 racing games. It has long been a favorite with myself and now with my kids because it's a very fast-paced, simple, and exciting race game, which is exactly what you would want from a racing game, of course. Now, one thing I really do need to do is post my variant on Board Game Geek that really helps to eliminate a bit of a runaway leader problem that this game is plagued with. Other than that, though, it is a great game and one that I'm happy to play with the kids anytime. Number 8 shows 1,700 owners on BGG. This is an old pick up and deliver game called Kings of Air and Steam. It is probably, I think it is actually the first game that I ever kickstarted, and it's a brilliant mix of mechanisms that include pick up and deliver, simultaneous action selection, market goods valuation, and unique player powers that are all beautifully blended together in a smooth flowing play experience. And it has great artwork and graphic design from Josh Capel. Just don't do what I do. And the first time I played the game, I played with the full 7-player account, all of whom were new to the game. So we were all basically learning as we went, and it was a painful experience. And yet I saw enough in the game to come back to it and have enjoyed a lot of plays over the years. It scales actually really well based on player accounts, though I would definitely not recommend playing with 7. Not a good idea. Alright, my number 7 game is a game I talked about in another recent video where I was talking about the Mr. Jack series of games. This one has 1,600 owners, and it is Le Fantôme de l'Opéra, which, as you can see, is not a Mr. Jack game per se, but if you watch the video you will see how it is very much related to Mr. Jack and its series of similar games. In fact, I say it's probably the most approachable of the games in that series. It's very easy to learn, easy to dive into and start playing. There's not a lot of setup involved, so the barrier to entry for this little two-player game is very low for sure. Okay, the next game, my number 6, also shows 1,600 views, but it only has 881 ratings versus Phantom of the Opera's 1,000 ratings on BGG. And that is the wee little game Armadora. This one is very simple yet highly tactical. It's fairly abstract, but with a light theme. Quick playing two-player game that even has variable player powers. Those variable player powers are fairly minimal, but they do just enough to add a sense of difference between the different types of characters you can play. It's a no-luck game, and it's definitely very much in your face, trying to grab what your opponent's trying to get. But it also plays super quickly, so there's not quite enough time to build up any real hard feelings with Armadora. Number 5 has 1,400 owners on BGG. And it is Steam Torpedo First Contact. This is one I really never hear anyone talking about. It's a simple yet highly tactical two-player game with asymmetrical sides that's based around crew activation and tactical maneuvering. I don't know why more people don't play this game, because there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there. There's so much variability too once you start to build your own custom submarines before play. Because there is a version of the game where you can draft tiles and use those tiles to build your sub, and then the game begins and you can see how well your submarine works. So in that sense, there's just a huge amount of variability. However, the one sub configuration that is recommended in the rule book is actually broken, because my friend discovered that there's a certain sequence that you can use in that particular configuration to be unbeatable essentially in the game. And I forget which of the two subs it is. I'm going to have to go back and try to figure that out and again post it on BGG, because it was quite a broken thing. But again, that has to do with just that one particular setup of the submarine, and is easily avoided by basically doing your own custom setup or switching some things around. So Steam Torpedo is my number 5. My number 4 has 1,300 owners, and that is another two-player game, King and Assassins. I've talked about this game in previous videos, and I've mentioned that it is a game that is sort of unbalanced in the difficulty level, and that it's much easier for the assassin player than it is for the king player to win the game. But I don't mind that too much, because a weaker player or younger player or less experienced player can definitely take on that role and have a decent shot of winning the game, such as when I'm playing with my kids, they can take on the assassins and potentially have some good success against killing me. There's also a decent electronic implementation that I think I got through Steam that is probably worth checking out if you're at all interested in the game. So that was my number 4, King and Assassins. My number 3 game has 1,200 owners on BGG. It's a tiny little game called Council of Verona 2nd Edition. This is a tiny card game of bluffing and intrigue where players are using their influence to sort of bet on certain characters achieving certain objectives. It's fairly wacky and unpredictable, and thus might be frustrating for people who like to have a certain amount of control over their political machinations, but it's just purely fun to watch everything get revealed at the end of the card and token play, and hear the groans and the laughter when it's clear who has gone ahead and who has not. It lists 2 to 5 players, but I think 3 is really the sweet spot for this particular game. It gives you a little bit more control about what's happening. Otherwise, it's just really quite chaotic. But again, it's another one that plays real quickly and has a low barrier to entry. So it might be worth checking out if you're interested in that sort of thing. That was number 3, Council of Verona. Number 2 has 785 owners. Yet again, it's a tiny little game called Prohi. I don't know if these games are overlooked because they're so small. If that's why everyone makes giant boxes full of Chinese air when they publish games. But this is a sneaky card game of trying to smuggle contraband loot under the noses of your fellow players while trying to catch them out doing the same, and it's always good for a laugh when you're able to do so. While I've never played Sheriff of Nottingham, I think this game is really in the same wheelhouse in terms of trying to smuggle contraband. But it seems to be a much smaller and easier game to get into, and that's why I went with Prohi. Though unlike some of the previous games I've been talking about, this one is better with more players. It says 3 to 6 players, but you probably want at least 4 players. Probably 4 to 5 would be the sweet spot with this one. And that was my number 2, Prohi. My number 1 overlooked gem of a board game on my board game shelves has only 601 owners. And that is Gentlemen Thieves. This is a very intriguing and tense game of hidden identities, sneaky play, bluffing, deduction, shifting alliances, and shared rewards, but making sure you end up with the most loot after all the burglaries are complete. But it's really the hidden identities part of the game that really makes it fun and tense. Although I don't feel that that is emphasized quite as much in the gameplay because there's not quite enough reward to keep your identity hidden, I think. And so that's why you want to go to BoardGameGeek.com, look up this game's variant forums, and find the one called Adding to the Suspense of the Secret Identities, which is something I wrote to encourage players to play in a sneaky fashion and keep their identities hidden. And with this game, you want about 3 or 4 players. It says 2 to 5, but I don't think I necessarily want to play with 2 or 5. The other clever thing about this game is the box itself, which uses a magnet to close, also doubles as the gameplay area. Well, part of it anyways. It holds some of the tokens and whatnot. So it's just a really neat little package, and I don't really know why people don't play that game. So those are my own top 10 overlooked gems. Tell me, what are some of the hidden gems that you have or that you have played? Let us in on the secret so that we can enjoy those games too. The preceding video has been brought to you free of charge by me, Josh. The only thing I ask in return is that you could do one of the following. Give me a thumb up, push the subscribe button, or share the link to this video with somebody who you think would enjoy it. Cheers. I'm going to have to explain how I did one that is very I would not quick playing 2-player game with have a decent to see who which closes again with it, and then with it and
Daddy?
Yeah?
Why is there a white car in our driveway?
Oh, that's Jasmina's car.
Jay, are you filming?
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay, bud.